So we're here today with Dr. Rhadi Ferguson. He's a distinguished educator, coach, and former elite athlete with a deep background in both academia and high-performance sport. A 2004 Judo Olympian, he holds a PhD in education and has spent decades refining training methodologies in combat sports and strength and conditioning. As a two-time graduate of Howard University, Dr. Ferguson has served as an adjunct professor, teaching judo and championing diversity in sport. His expertise spans across coaching Olympians, professional MMA fighters, and world-class judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu competitors. With a focus on technical mastery and skill acquisition, he is a thought leader in pedagogy, bridging the gap between traditional drill-based instruction and ecological dynamics in training. In addition to his academic and coaching roles, Dr. Ferguson is a prolific author, known for works such as Judo is Life, Judo Strong, and the Niwaza Mind Shift. His ability to blend scientific research with real-world application has made him a sought-after speaker on topics related to coaching efficacy, skill acquisition, and performance optimization. Today, he joins us to discuss the balance between efficacy in ecological approaches versus drill-based training, exploring what truly works when developing elite-level athletes and learners. And for myself, I'll just say, just so that you know a little bit where I'm coming from, so my undergraduate degree was in biochemistry and biology from Brandeis University. And I graduated in 2015 and I transitioned more into teaching movement. So what I do is I teach people how to be skilled in moving across multiple sports and outside of just the specializations of their sport. And then I recently finished my master's in kinesiology from San Jose State University. And I did my master's project on applying ecological dynamics to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instruction. So today I have some goals for us. Again, I've called this a collaborative debate. So our first goal is to explain each other's ideas in ways that we both kind of approve of, so that I can explain your thought process and your paradigms and how you're working in a way that you're like, yeah, that's it. And you can explain also ecological dynamics approaches where I'm like, yep, you got it. And then from there, we can move into actually engaging with like, where do we agree and disagree and blah, blah, blah. But first, can we get to a point where we each understand what we're saying and also recognizing that I think we're both a lot more knowledgeable than a lot of the people in the audience.
100%. 100%.
So we can try to also like think about their perspective and make things like, not just say things that like we know we both understand, but also like how do we make it clear for people where, they're doing jiu-jitsu, but like, they've never read a motor learning book in their life, right? So
let me say this. At my core, I'm a behaviorist. So I'm more of a Thorndike, B.F. Skinner person, the old school model of stimulus response. Mm-hmm. I provide a stimulus and I get a response. Mm-hmm. From a kinesiologist standpoint, if we both study movement, I am a rigid person when it comes to creating a neurological pathway, laying down the myelin sheath through reps, mm-hmm. and then moving from that point along the spectrum of the continuum of adding things to that in order to create the options to access those different pathways. That's more of the drilling approach. And I think we both agree on that. If you want to extrapolate my dissertation,
okay,
and I'm sure you'd understand that my dissertation did exist in what we would call it touched on the eco approach in such that it was on this. My dissertation was on how to make improvements in the NFL 225 bench press failure test without touching the bench press. So you trained in a stabilization limited training environment on medicine balls and stability balls, did not touch the bench press, and then came back to the bench press, and then the bench press actually improved.
Nice.
Okay. The problem with that approach in my dissertation is if the person didn't come with existing and a basement level of existing strength, then that necessarily did not work within
Sure.
that domain. Okay, that
Sure.
doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it would not work within the domain of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in that domain.
And so
I'm
when you
sure.
say that domain, you're talking about strength and conditioning.
Exactly. And so, which, and I'm sure that the people who can follow, and they can always go back and watch, you and I both agree that each approach has its limitations. Like we can't put 10 people in the room and say, you know what? I want you to get this weight above your head with your arms locked. Go. There's, you have
Sure.
to,
We're
you have to
talking
do
about a clean and jerk.
a clean and jerk or a snatch. There's some things that have to be taught. So the, when we get a little bit deeper into the discussion, for those who are listening, we're really talking about the efficacy of each approach as it applies to the grappling arts of judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Greco, freestyle, etc. With that being said, to have my understanding of the eco approach, because I think we both agree on how we think about how I think about the
Well, yeah, let's I mean, let's
Yeah,
just
go
make
ahead.
sure, right? So
Okay,
like
go ahead.
let's validate.
Yes,
So
100%.
my understanding of what your approach is and your perspective is that it's kind of a state of, linear pedagogy, right? It's like there's a perception and action, right? There's something happening in the environment. Our opponent does a certain action, and that presents a certain opportunity for a certain type of move. And to learn those moves, we need to do these repetitions practicing the movement, where as we're repeating the move, we're running that kind of neural pathway. And each time we're running that pathway, it's like myelinating, it's becoming more automatic, it's working more efficiently at a neural level, it's running more automatic so that your brain can essentially just pull that motor program and quickly run that pattern, and that pattern is going to be efficient and quick and effective, and all the sorts of things that we would call it
Exactly.
efficient skill.
Correct.
Is that
100%. 100%.
great?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any more kind of nuances that we should add to that?
The nuances are, of course, the constraints for those particular things working as have been discussed before. You still need a good coach in order to do it. Case in point, you can use that approach, and Floyd Mayweather's family can use that approach. And Floyd Mayweather's family, the pad work that they've developed, it creates the defense for every type of style, because the dad, the uncle, and the uncle before him, they've all put their seasoning on that style so that it takes care of everything. But most individuals don't have the amount of reps that Floyd has in order to use that particular approach. Now, that is 100% drill-based approach. 100%. And it's 100% effective. That doesn't mean it's the only approach that works.
Sure.
But that approach does work. I still want you to explain your thing, but the one thing I want to hammer down for people who are listening early, and I want to pull everybody out of the space of we're battling each other. We're having a debate in the true sense of the dialectical of we each provide our thesis, we get the antithesis from the other person, and then we read synthesis. I want everybody to leave here with the understanding that I can get something from both approaches. I personally use both approaches, and I don't like the eco approach at all. I don't like it. I have a friend, Dr. Christopher Round, that I work with, who has hammered in my head the benefits of using the eco approach, and I don't like it. But I also see the benefits from it. At certain levels, I see the benefit, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
I listen, there's parts of me that fight it. I abhor it. I detest it. I don't. But it has value, and in the discussion, I will talk about the points where it doesn't have value. All right, but I believe it has value. But if you want to explain what the eco approach is to you, I'm willing to listen.
Absolutely. Before we get to that, though, already there's some things I want to just explain.
Let's do free. Really.
Like Floyd's perspective, right? That's an interesting example. Before we come to eco, let me just say, if I can explain from your perspective what's happening with someone like Floyd Mayweather, who, like, I'm not familiar with all the intricacies of how he trains, but I'm going to kind of extrapolate my guesses based on a little bit of what I know and what you've said. And so it sounds like what you're saying. So pad work is, they're practicing boxing skills, right? And there's certain types of punches that you want to do. And so you're working with a partner and they're holding the pads where you have to do certain punches to those pads, right? And so what it sounds like you're saying is that from your perspective, someone like Floyd Mayweather, his skill is coming from the thousands of repetitions he's done with hitting those pads, provided in those certain ways, and that his family has kind of refined over generations of, like, how do I hold these pads so that it represents the sort of things that are going to happen when you actually go. Okay, his power went out. Okay.
So I left off at Floyd Mayweather, and you get ready to. For everybody, we had a technical difficulty. Power went off. He's on bread.
So my understanding of your perspective of that is that Floyd and athletes like Floyd, what's going on there, and maybe explaining that expertise from a traditional perspective, it sounds like you're saying that the way they're holding the pads, that they've developed over generations of lots of refinement and teaching and iterations of seeing what works. And again, even in the traditional approach, we have the principle of specificity, right? Like what is specific to the performance environment. And so how can you hold the pads in a way where it's representing the sort of punches that he would have to do, and even the sort of ducks that he would have to do in an actual boxing match?
Right, that covers the spectrum of every approach that he would see.
Yes.
Now, and let's be clear, okay? At the end of the day, and this is why both approaches, as I said, occur on a continuum. He's learning a drill-based approach inside the gym. Mm-hmm. In the boxing match, any competition is a CLA approach. Any competition is a constraints level. So when he's boxing, he's actually in the eco dynamic, and then they take what they've learned from that and they push it back into the drilling dynamic, which is, I had an opportunity, if anybody watches this, I would encourage them to watch some other videos, but I saw, I think Greg Souders have a discussion with a gentleman who's a bodybuilder, coach, PhD, who's also a jiu-jitsu practitioner. And he was really trying to be very, very, very cool. I don't know if Greg did it on purpose, but it was like when he was speaking, I don't think he meant to do it, but he was taking pot shots at him. And the guy wasn't responding because, I mean, he's very, the guy's like, bro, I know.
Dr. Mike's chill. Like he's
Dr.
cool
Mike's
like
chill. And he knows his shit. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't even but there was some pot shots that Greg was throwing. But he was trying to basically let him know that, man, neither one of these approaches occurs in isolation. And there are some points of the approach of drill-based teaching and learning that you are utilizing in the eco side. It's not just eco alone. It's the eco approach. It's an eco dominant approach. And the question is, does the eco dominant approach work? Yes, it works to a point.
Okay. Yeah. And so again, just my regurgitation of that we're checking. That also the other thing I didn't mention, the thousands of reps of doing those punches. Again, he's like running those neural pathways, laying down the myelin sheath, making it all more automatic, more refined. And then, just this last thing that you're saying of, like, that the performance environment is, like, has to be a part of this, right? There's no traditional approach And this is, I don't want to again get into like my perspective yet,
That's
but
okay, Bren.
you know, um, but I think even from your perspective, right? There's traditional approaches in like traditional martial arts where they just do the moves, right? And things like Wing Chun, right? Or Taekwondo a lot of times, where they're just practicing the moves and they never integrate it into a real performance environment where they're actually trying to hit each other or avoid these things. And that really doesn't work. And I think that's pretty clear even from the traditional approach. And so what I feel your perspective is on this is that, kind of the intelligent traditional approach here.
Give me one moment. Give me one moment.
Yeah.
Let me ask a question because I saw this before.
Uh-huh.
When you say it really doesn't work, what are we talking about when we say
Great.
work?
Great.
Yes.
Excellent point. So when I say work, I mean it doesn't work in the performance environment of like combat. So, for instance, when we drill these movements in isolation, that we're going to do these things, and we never integrate them into like I'm actually fighting someone now, it doesn't work as far as.
So let's talk about this. Okay. Here is where I think things get lost and somewhat conflated.
Okay. Okay.
There's I'm working the Wing Chun in isolation. And I use Wing Chun to help with my grip fighting. I use it to train my football players.
Uh-huh.
My son does. I use it.
Uh-huh.
And it works. Okay.
Okay.
Then there's a portion where we take that particular skill, and then we begin to add resistance to it, add resistance to it, add resistance to it, to the point where it then moves itself into the eco approach.
Sure.
What happens on the eco approach is that instead of learning the skill, you go from the eco approach and then you learn the movements. Mm-hmm. The problem is that's like putting 1,000 monkeys in a room on a typewriter and saying somebody's going to type out the Iliad over a period of time. And somebody will type out the Iliad over a period of time.
Sure.
And they will.
Right.
However, the question is when we talk about the efficacy, is that approach better for what we're trying to achieve? Now,
yes.
If we're trying to make an Olympic champion, the eco approach ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna work.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Now, if we're trying to build some quality level grapplers, some 9-to-5 guys, even a BJJ world champion, because let's be clear, and I want everybody to hear me when I say this. In the realm of grappling, in terms of physical attributes and physiological development, BJJ is at the bottom of the barrel. It's the basement level. So when you say I'm an elite level BJJ player, elite level at what? Your VO2 max sucks, your squat sucks, your clean sucks.
Sure.
You know these numbers. You've seen the research of these numbers.
Sure.
And a world champion BJJ person is not in the same realm of a world champion judoka or a
wrestler.
World champion. And I'm not talking about skill. I'm talking about physiological attributes of those championship people. Now, what makes Gordon Ryan and those dudes anomalies is they use exogenous aids to make themselves like a Tata Renair. So they begin to look like, they look and feel like and achieve things that you normally shouldn't achieve because they don't belong in that athlete pool. I tell people all the time, if you're really good in high school at wrestling, you're wrestling in what? College.
Sure.
If you don't wrestle in college, you might go to college and you might end up in the what? In the BJJ club. And then when you're in the BJJ, right, and then you're in the BJJ club, you're beating everybody. Right. The guy who's really good high school football player plays football where? In college.
Right.
The guy that's not that good, but he could have gone, ends up in BJJ, or he ends up in you understand what I'm saying? Like the world class athlete ends up doing his sport. He'll do MMA after, but there's no world class athletes doing MMA. Like somebody asked me, "Do you think John Jones is a better wrestler than Daniel Cormier?" Hell no. Are you crazy? Like Daniel Cormier was one of the best in the world ever.
Sure.
He went to wrestle, and John Jones has his own path.
Sure. I'm not as sure about MMA. And let's
I'm,
maybe
I'm,
let's not piss anyone off too much in
no,
jujitsu.
no, I'm sure because I've trained MMA athletes and I've done the numbers,
Sure.
which is why a Brock Lesnar can come in with little to nothing and dominate. He
Yeah.
the
Okay.
pool. I told people this, and these are all great. This is all great information. I tell people this. I said when it comes to MMA, I can give you any weight class in MMA. You can give me the number one guy and the number two guy. When I ask you for the number three guy, you'll draw a blank.
Sure.
In every weight class, it's because the drop off on those sports in judo and freestyle and Greco, the number 1 through 16 can beat each other.
Sure.
The number 16 guy is not beating
Sure.
the number one guy in MMA.
And your perspective on that is because it's so much more competitive.
It's more competitive. The pool
Okay.
of athletes, it's a greater pool of athletes there. It's like having an argument with somebody. I know, and I might get backlash, and it's okay. But we're talking about statistics, and we're talking about population pool. Okay, when you look at female athletics and male athletics, the population pool of females in the athlete space is just less.
For sure.
It's just there's less competition in that space.
Yeah.
Right, and that's not saying that one is better than the other. It's less competition in that space. So it's statistically it's easier to achieve a high level thing on the female side than the male side because of population pool.
Sure.
That's it.
And so to go back to this kind of like hybrid thing, I think, okay, maybe I got away a little bit with like the it doesn't work in the transfer is not, sounds like that's not your perspective, but maybe that if we aren't dialing up the resistance enough,
it won't work, period.
yeah, it's going to work less.
Because it has to mimic the environment of play, which we both agree
Totally.
in the eco approach and this drill-based approach, it has to work itself to mimic the environment of play,
Yes.
which is why I say that's why it burns me up so bad when I see the whole eco versus drilling-based approach thing, because
Sure.
eco is actually a part of the drill-based approach. It's the microcosm of the drill-based approach.
So-
It's the part where we need to do the live-based stuff. The problem is in most traditional martial arts, they don't have that part.
Yeah.
Now, here's what I'll say about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is judo. Period. Point blank. End of story. Don't care how you run it back and forth. Pop,
Okay.
pop, boom, boom.
Okay.
I've studied it longer than most people have been doing it. Okay. Every move that you do in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, every one of them is in judo. All of them. From the heel hooks, leg locks, spinning upside down on your head, inverted, all of them are in judo. They're in a judo book somewhere that you can find.
Sure.
The iterations that BJJ is going through right now, judo's already gone through these iterations. It's not that the uchikomis don't work. We do uchikomi, we do 3-person uchikomis, we do moving uchikomis, we do moving, and then we do constraint-led randori sessions where you can only do foot sweeps and only do uchigar, or only do osoto, or you can only throw, or you can only get this grip. We've been through all those iterations. BJJ is just going through what judo's done already. All of our practices at the high level have all these things in them already. It's cool to watch BJJ go through this iteration, even with the referees in suits on the mat and the people in 2 chairs and I'm watching BJJ go through the same iterations that judo went through. Even on the coaching side, there's not enough world-class coaches in BJJ right now. So these discussions where people are going back and forth about which approach is better, all that stuff is great. On the judo side, man, we've been through all that already. I know exactly how to do those things when it comes to coaching. I mean, I've coached guys that have gone to the Olympics. I coached guys that have won the worlds in BJJ. I've done it. I've done the strength and conditioning side. I've seen exactly what works. So I would never espouse an approach as the end all be all approach. I can tell you what I do when a child comes into or an adult comes into my dojo. This is when I watched Greg, and he was like, and he told Dr. Mike, that's his name.
Yeah.
That he doesn't need any verbal cues or verbal lesson before the lesson starts. And I'm like, you and I know from a movement-based approach, and if we look at the information processing theory, like there's a sender and a receiver. Like From the information processing theory, there's a sender and a receiver. Even if you're doing an eco-based drill, I have to tell you what the drill is about. Okay. All right. That's
Okay.
on some level. Now,
Yeah.
we can also talk about apps, which apps don't require you to any lesson, just like
Okay.
kids don't need a lesson before they go and play kickball. There's that approach too. I'm talking
Okay.
about the higher level learning requires some type of prompting, cueing lesson or something. So
Why?
I'll tell you why. Because when a person, because of mimicking and mirroring, all right, and then we can get into the realm of rehearsal too, which is really gonna get you because it is what you do in your movement base is you do rehearsal, and the rehearsal provides recall, and that recall allows you to do because movements make up moves. Okay, so let me say this: when somebody comes into the dojo, I need to find out what type of learner they are, and I need to meet them where they are. Are they an auditory learner? Are they a visual learner? Are they an auditory visual learner? Or are they a tactile learner? Now, the eco approach is a tactile approach, 100%. Everybody doesn't learn from a tactile approach best.
Okay.
You have to make space for the auditory learner. You have to make space for the visual learner, which is why Dr. Mike was telling Greg that time. He said, well, I had a guy who was watching video. He came to my dojo and he did it. And my Dr. Mike was like, yeah, motherfucker, because he was watching the movements. And you know, just like I know, when you're watching the movements, your brain is still doing the neurological,
Sure.
digging and construction. And you're creating the
Sure.
pathway just by what? Watching.
Right.
Now, the learning by doing is what, and you understand that from the space that we're in. The learning by doing is more of a tactile thing, but you can also learn by watching. You can learn by hearing.
Sure. Yeah. So again, I don't want to get into like my disagreements so much yet, but again, just to understand your perspective on this, like a little more clearly, are you saying that for you, people, so say someone comes into the gym, right? And you're like, imagine you have a day zero guy, you're trying to teach him some judo. And are you saying, for instance, if you have him do that foot sweep game, right? Where it's like, okay, we're sparring, randori, you have to do a foot sweep. That if you don't tell the guy what a foot sweep is and what it should look like, that I think you're not saying that it can't happen, but you're saying it can't happen at a high level. Is that
It
what
won't
I'm
happen at a high level. Now, here's the thing. He will see what a foot sweep looks like by being in the environment, watching a foot sweep done on him. Now, I understand that in terms of the eco approach, they want the immersion in that space to create the learning of he's processing, how is this being done? How can I do it? How is this off balancing working? How are they getting me off balance? And then allow the body to learn like that. I get it. I get it. But here's the problem. You can go play paintball and play paintball well, but you'll never become a sniper. The military sciences and the way that skills are learned and acquired in order for elite level and optimum performance are in the same space that swordsmanship occurs and that marksmanship occurs. And I will explain it here. One, static shooter, static target. Two, static shooter, moving target. Two, three, moving shooter, static target. Four, moving shooter, moving target. Five, what you would call the eco approach. Multiple targets, multiple shooters moving around playing. Now, the eco approach bypasses marksmanship for what we would call educative value in play. Is there educative value in play? Yes. Here's where capitalism comes into place. And I am saying this to everybody listening. If you are a school owner and it is not your desire to develop Olympic champions, because you can develop BJJ world champions using this ego approach, the level is not high enough. And if you want to grow your school and make it fun, eco is probably one of the best options for you. But eco bypasses the marksmanship skills in order to play paintball. Now, let me tell you something. You can go to any facility that you want to. When it comes to paintball, those places are packed on Saturday and Sunday. The person who's teaching skills and marksmanship, his calendar ain't full.
And so this is the deliberate practice piece of this, right? So you're saying
deliberate practice is boring. It is tear-inducing. It sucks. It is not fun. Nobody likes it. Nobody. If you want to kill your school, do deliberate practice. I'm here to tell you, I do deliberate practice. Okay.
Right.
On the weekends, private lessons for the people who really want to achieve at that level.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. People think that doesn't work. And I'm going to give you a judo example. Just what you said. Little Bobby comes in and little Ronnie comes in. Little Bobby comes in, you teach him the eco approach.
Okay.
He's 5 years old. Okay. But you got little Bobby. I got little Ronnie. Little Ronnie, I'm teaching him deliberate practice. Where to put your hands, where to grip. Man, Bobby is kicking Ronnie's ass when he's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. When he gets to cadets, little Bobby's not going to beat Ronnie anymore. But here's the issue. When that kid gets 14 or 15, they're leaving anyway to go play high school sports. They never want to be that good, or they don't care to be that good.
So you're saying again, for the kids, for kids and for novices, with games, with eco, with like fully live, fully resistance things, it'll work better. But if you want to go far, you need to develop these foundational skills with precision and with expert feedback.
And then you can take those things and put them in the eco environment, and that person is more of a marksman, because there are no Olympic or world champions who have done the eco method solely. There are none. And the research for eco is very new. Okay. Other than the stuff on affordances, the pure eco research is 10 to 15 years. It's new stuff. When it comes to drill-based instruction, man, you're going all the way to 1919. Thorndike, you're talking skin. Like the research on that is massive. And there's a reason why. You do not have to be, I can be a better athlete than you, and you can beat me in chess.
Totally. Right.
Jiu-jitsu's chess. It's constraint-led. It's actually CLA chess that removes most of the athleticism part that I would rely on in order to win. Putting you on your feet.
Sure.
Right. Making you balance. It removes kinesthetic awareness, a great deal of it, because you're not standing. Right. So me being a better athlete than you doesn't really matter that much. Yeah. No, it doesn't. Right. Exactly. Right. So because I'm not saying it's more skillful than the other sports, it relies on more skill than physical attributes.
Sure.
It's more,
and context relevant skill as well.
Correct. Which is why the eco approach and the CLA approach will work. Now, let me say this, and this is why I say that the CLA approach is part and parcel of the whole program for development for an athlete. All of us are going to do the following. CLA is really the P in the WPW approach when it comes to whole, part, whole. We take the whole thing, okay? We look at where the issues are, the problems. We put Johnny in there and we watched him roll. We watched it. Eco, watch him roll. See, okay, Johnny he's having a problem. Let's address him getting around the legs. So we're going to break down that. part of it. So we take that part out. What does he need to get around these legs? So we create a leg base or get around the legs game. Okay. This is where I believe the two approaches can work. Yes, we can teach a get around the legs game, and we can show him, hey, these are or three of the things that I like to do to get around the legs. Why don't you guys try this 2-3 sets on each side? Boom, and then back up, and then put them back into what what you would call the eco, what I call randori, what we would call the hole. Put them back into the hole, and then they go click, 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 click. But to remove the drilling part altogether is not going to give that person an opportunity to be in the space of the elite. But there is no real elite in jiu-jitsu, so it don't matter.
Why? Last thing, and then I want to start explaining some ecos. I really want to start explaining, but one last thing. Why would you say you need that? Like what cannot work without that establishment of those foundational movement patterns?
Expertise. And that's what Anders K. Erickson talks about. That I'm going to explain directly. There's not enough laying down of the myelin sheath. When you learn a move, you learn it to become proficient. And then after you become proficient at the movement, then because your proficiency is high, then you become efficient at the movement. So it doesn't take as much to do it. The eco approach looks at finding a lot of different ways to get this outcome done. The drill-based approach is, I'm going to create this opportunity to do this, which is why on the judo side, to explain further, world-class judoka use 3 to 5 throws, 3 to 5 ground techniques. That's it. The rest of it, they're pushing you into the corner to make you do the thing that they want to do. It becomes a battle of strength and conditioning in order to get you into that space so that I can finish. That's it. Now, the eco approach to learn grip fighting, you tell somebody, I need you to acquire the sleeve, put it at the hip. The drill-based approach is we go over how to grab the sleeve, move back, post at the shoulder, catch the sleeve, push into the hip, grab. So you have steps on how to kill the sleeve. And then I'll go over all the options that are happening, because grappling isn't infinite. It is finite. It's finite. That's the one thing I heard, man. It's very difficult to listen to people who suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the movements in and of themselves are finite. They're not infinite.
There's a finite number of patterns.
There's a finite number of patterns of permutations and iterations. Now let's go back to Floyd Mayweather. They understand in the CLA approach of boxing, because boxing is constrained, like Greco. Greco is constrained. So there's even less, patterns, which makes it more difficult. Now, jiu-jitsu, thank God that we're having this discussion. Because Brazilian jiu-jitsu, especially in the no-gi space, allows so many things of ankle locks, toe holds, knee bars, hip locks, arm locks, shoulder locks, neck locks, some places spine locks, takedowns, like chokes. Like there's so much
complexity.
Layers. What'd you say?
Complexity.
There's so much complexity in there that you don't have to be an expert on anything. You just have to be expert in a little thing and be well enough versed in everything else. And the eco approach is a great approach, especially as it pertains to no-gi grappling, because it allows you to be well versed in enough stuff until you can get to your particular thing. Because when Greg says it doesn't work, or when people say it doesn't work, when I hear you say it's the best way, in the space of no-gi grappling, not gi, in the space of no-gi grappling, I can't argue that. Because we say?
How so?
I can't argue it because it's so complex And eco provides you with such a broad base of exposure in the early stages when the likelihood of somebody staying in that sport for a lifetime is low, unless they have some level of success. The eco provides them with success. The eco provides them with fun. The eco provides them with exposure. And for you to drill, okay, ankles, knees, hips. Man, by that time you've been grappling for 50 years.
Okay,
And
so
that's why people say
yeah.
you'll never figure it all out. That's not the case with Greco. Because Greco is a CLA approach. Boxing is a CLA approach.
Like
Judo is a CLA approach.
boxing, wrestling, these are
They're
less complex
constrained,
sports.
but they're
where-
constrained.
I mean, they're all constrained, but they're more
all
heavily constrained.
Exactly.
And you're saying, if I understand, you're saying that because grappling, because no-gi, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu hasn't reached the level of, say, the Olympic sports, judo, wrestling, say the really competitive Olympic sports, that the CLA can work fine and great because most people are in the novice, say, intermediate stage in a larger scheme of things where the CLA is more effective than drilling. But that if people wanted to get really, really good, like you see in judo or wrestling, that they would need to drill first and it would have a delayed return, and that in the long term, they would do better by drilling first at a highest level.
Yeah. Yes, I'm going to agree with you. Yes. And I would say they would need both approaches early. And which is why I don't agree with only eco. I don't agree with an only eco approach. Mm-hmm. And let me say this. I don't agree with that only drilling approach. Mm-hmm. That part I vehemently disagree with anybody. Greg Souders, anybody. Like, I vehemently disagree. There are certain, case in point, okay? Let's look at, it's a very famous video on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, on a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu movement in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community called the mousetrap armbar that Lloyd Irvin showed years ago. On this mousetrap armbar, he goes over how to do udigarami, udigatami, udigarami. When you keep bending the arm, which you would call the Americana, what the hell do you call it in Jiu-Jitsu? Americana.
The straight arm lock, I think, is
Americana. What is it called? The key lock, America. I don't know it.
Yeah, Americana.
Udigarami, udigatami, udigarami. Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So there's no way for you to get enough reps on doing that iteration and going through the mental representation of knowing what to do, of having the right stimulus applied to do the right response without the drilling. You need a certain stimulus with a certain response over and over again, lightly to drill, even at first with no resistance in order to learn it.
Mm-hmm. Are you satisfied so far with my understanding of your perspective?
Oh, 100%. I'm 100%.
Awesome.
I don't have any, because you come from a kinesiology background, you clearly understand stimulus and response. You clearly understand movement. You clearly understand how people learn how to ambulate, how they learn how to walk. Nobody shoots out of the womb and starts running. They don't. There's a process of crawling and then falling and then walking and I understand based upon the eco approach, you're like, see, you don't have to go all through that. They'll learn how to walk. But there are people who grab the babies by the hand and help them walk and do the thing, which is a blend of the two approaches. But please go ahead. I'm very, very satisfied with where you're at on it. Thanks for asking.
Fantastic. Okay, so stage 2, we're running through successful. So for ecological dynamics, what we're thinking is, again, it's not just the CLA, right? I think so. There's a lot of different things. We'll try to get through all of them. So first, like the constraints-led approach, the idea is essentially we're giving people tasks and games rather than movements, right? And so first, I think there's a little bit of a misconception often that I think, especially from the deliberate practice perspective, that like games are just play, like they're unstructured play, and unstructured play is clearly great, but like you're saying, especially from a deliberate practice perspective, like unstructured play is not going to get you to the Olympics, right? Like it's fun, it's engaging, provides a great foundation for general motor learning of all sorts of things that especially are going to give you a wider foundation if you then, you're a kid and you're playing grappling games for 10 years as opposed to drilling specific moves. That's going to give you a wider transfer to other things you want to do if you, in high school decide you want to do soccer now, right? Okay.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand what you're saying.
Uh-huh.
You're saying that the belief or what you're purporting or espousing is that utilizing the eco approach is going to basically create a better athlete than doing the drilling approach.
This is kind of from a traditional perspective even of like play, right? Like play research.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that's pretty like well studied and pretty clear that like play kind of gives you better transfer, right? When we're doing these wider things. And when we think about it from an ecological dynamics perspective, it's essentially like there's less specificity, right? So if we think of like, little Johnny, he's 5 and he's playing judo games, or he's drilling judo moves. The judo moves are extremely specific to judo, right? Versus maybe the games are going to teach her more wider things of balance and distance and utilizing a lot of different skills and developing coordinative synergies that when he goes to do other things are going to get better transfer. That research is pretty clear.
I got exactly what you're saying, and I think I think what some people miss, not you or I, is that Dr. Kano, who created judo, he understood that the ecological approach was necessary because before doing the jujitsu, there was no opportunity to play. So you couldn't play with it because you can't practice killing somebody. So right. the inclusion right. of the judo, the softness of the sport came from the inclusion of randori. Randori is the free play that allows the judo practitioner who is just using the moves to use them in an environment without trying to kill somebody, but with resistance and with a partner. That's the eco approach that's already included in judo as a whole. But I'm with you. Learning the moves, and I have no disrespect for kata. I think kata is important to maintain the traditional side of the sport. But you can't just go do kata and be like, I got it. I can go whoop some ass right now. That's not going to work. So we
totally agree on that.
We agree.
So then the constraints-led approach is also not just play, right? So first, it's a very like systematic way of setting up these games where we're not just throwing people into like, just go roll or just do judo. It's very tactical. It's very systematic.
Let me ask you a question because this is new, and in the research space, I would have to ask you this: who is creating the games first, and have the games been validated to be good? Mm-hmm. Right, because the curriculum for BJJ is all over the board. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it to be contentious. I'm just asking.
Yeah. So are you talking about kind of like historical validation? Like the moves have been the moves, and they've clearly kind of been tested over a long time now. Versus like these games are newer. And
100%, 100% for the listener. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's the coach is creating the games, right?
There you go.
And so obviously it's like some things are newer, some are older. And again, like there's the tasks and there's the constraints-led approach. The task, constraints-led approach, ecological dynamics approach, right? These are different things. And so like the tasks, even in the traditional approach, people have been using these forever, right? You, like you're saying, you can't really do it without the tasks. We both agree on that.
Yes.
But so the constraints-led approach is different than just those. It's like, how do we systematically create these tasks and games that are going to help people develop skill, right? And so we're modifying the constraints so that we think about the constraints of the task. How do we set up the task? What are the rules? What are the objectives? We think about the constraints acting on the individual. So like think of, all the physiological things, sleep, stress, motivation, intention, focus, blah, blah, blah. So the task, individual, and environment. So how do we set up the environment? The environment is also playing a huge role in this. And it affects everything that we're going to do. So how do we also modify the environment so that we can create these better situations for skill development?
Right. Right. The development outcome. Right.
So the reason we do that, I think this is where I think you do a really good job of like kind of steel manning the traditional approach and like the kind of like hybrid thing that a lot of us feel is a misrepresentation of ecological dynamics, where
but if you really get down to it, it is the ecological approach in total.
No, I would disagree with that.
Okay,
right?
okay.
Yeah.
We can talk about, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So what I would say is, and what I think most of us would say in this perspective is ecological dynamics. So we just talked about the constraints-led approach, right? Using games. You can run the games from the traditional, from your same like perspective. You don't have to change any like fundamental theories of how you believe perception, action, and movement are working and are coordinated to use games for skill development, right? And you already do. And I think that's, and a lot of people already do. And that's where this idea that like, oh, we just need both comes from, right? That to me, that is the traditional approach, is linear pedagogy, is we're building, is kind of the definition of what we call linear pedagogy, which is like you build the skill at a foundational level, right? You practice the throw, you myelinate the neural pathways, right? You build the mental representations, and then you integrate it into the sport at some level. So now maybe you're doing randori, you're doing the sparring, but you have to do the move or what have you. And then from there, you move to like, how do you get that to transfer to the competition, the performance environment, right? That's the traditional approach. And you could say that uses both approaches because you're using games and tasks in that. So you could see that as a hybrid approach, but really at a theoretical level, that's all based on the foundational paradigms of the traditional approach.
100%. It's based in that. Yes, correct. It's bathed severely in it and soaked.
Totally.
Yes.
And so what we're saying is like, let's go deeper to ecological dynamics. Like why are we doing the tasks? And so now we get into like direct perception, into affordance. I mean, there's basic stuff that like is very, very clear.
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
I think this is valuable, but there are points where it fails miserably.
Uh-huh.
Okay. You're a tennis coach. I bring Sally to you, and I need you to teach her how to serve.
You bring who to me?
Sally or Lisa.
Okay, Sally, sure, the girl.
You have to teach her how to serve. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm tempted to address this now, but then also.
No. But here's the thing. I don't want it to get lost that the eco approach is a quality model to use. I think that it has the skill-based approach will work for anybody.
The drilling, traditional
The
stuff.
drill, the drill-based approach will work for anybody. It may take, listen, in my opinion, it takes longer in the beginning, but there's things that you can do at the end. It'll work for any. The eco approach is not going to work for every sport. The eco approach doesn't work if we're cleaning and jerking. It doesn't work if we're snatching. Eco approach doesn't work if I'm trying to teach a tennis serve. It doesn't work. The ego approach does work if I'm trying to teach somebody how to play chess.
Yeah.
We can sit down and play chess, and then we can talk about it because I know you can't move that, and you'll figure it out as you go. You don't have to sit there and drill chess. Not to play, but if you want to be a world-class chess player, you do.
Let's come back to this. Let's come back to specifically. I want to get back to the Sally example. That's a really good example. So, and again, this comes back to like why we need to understand ecological dynamics as a foundational paradigm, right? At least to understand why this is different from kind of the traditional method. Why we're saying we should probably be doing these tasks all the time for most sports. And so, okay, so there's basic stuff. Everyone will agree, it's very clear, at least everyone will agree that has looked into the science, that we know the brain, the mind isn't just this thing that is like contained in the body, right? Like it's embodied. How we move around our environment, our positions, our actions, our fatigue affects our perception, affects our emotion, affects our cognition. Like we're fundamentally embodied organisms, right? It's not just, you can't just take the brain and that's the mind, that's you, right? You are this embodied self in an environment, right? So we think about coordination. I think coordination is the first place to start with this. So in the traditional approach, we think of these like motor programs, right? Where we've got the representation of like, this is an uchimata, right? A judo throw. So that's stored somewhere in the brain, and that the brain is top-down controlling the body and telling the body what to do and how to do this pattern, right? There's a lot of problems with that. There's a lot of like fundamental theoretical problems with that. There's a lot of fundamental.
So there's a lot of fundamental problems with what you just described as the information processing theory.
Yes.
Okay, which one? I'd like to hear them.
Yes, there's a lot. There's a lot.
I'm here for
one of the biggest ones that we'll touch on right now is called like the loan of information problem. So the idea is like, and there's like that. This also comes to the outness problem. So think like, okay, you're born, right, and you start. Let's say at some point you're conscious. You're thinking, right? Maybe you're still a child. Maybe you're whatever age. Say 10, right? You perceive the world around you. You perceive these things. You perceive yourself. You perceive the world around you. How does that happen, right? So there's this idea that like in information processing theories that the information we're getting from the environment is deprived, right? That it's fundamentally not everything you need is present in the information that's coming to you.
And you filling in the blanks.
Exactly. Your brain has
as you develop your conceptual framework, you start filling in the blanks based upon what you believe.
Right. So that's the idea. Like the information isn't enough. Your brain needs, and it's noisy. So your brain needs to fix it using previous information, right? Previous information, inferences, memories, blah, blah, blah.
Correct.
Now, if we back propagate that through time, because like, okay, so you're 10. So let's say, okay, you perceive, there's a water bottle and inside it is water and I know what it is. I know what I can do with it. And that comes from my previous memories that I'm using to enrich the information I'm getting, right? If we back propagate that over time, when did that start? Because now I'm 9, but I'm still enriching I'm still enriching the sensory information with my mental models, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 8. There's still like, okay, maybe the models are worse, but like they're still being enriched. And so if you back propagate that all the way, you still run into this problem. Where did that extra information come from that you can use to fix the new sensory information? And if you have something that you're using to fix this bad sensory information, it has to be better. So like, where is that better thing always coming from? The traditional approach doesn't have an answer for that. It's just an ongoing problem. And so,
And it doesn't really need an answer for that, because that would take us all the way back to, if we're going on a behaviorist model, that would take us all the way back to, how does the baby know how to suck when it comes out of the womb?
but we want our theories to explain everything, right? The better theories explain more stuff. Explain more of the reality we see. And worse, older theories fail to explain a lot of the things we see.
I wouldn't go. I like how you color the listener there. Worse, older theories. Older theories.
There's some theories that are older and worse, right? We don't have to say this is one, but there are some theories, and the idea is we move forward.
Right. So there are certain things that human beings do without being taught to do them. Okay.
Okay.
There are certain things that animals see, like there are certain patterns on the back of a snake that provide an animal with caution and pause, even if they don't know what the hell that animal is. Okay. Those particular things, so there's that hourglass on the back of the Black Widow that has the color red that makes us, like, we don't really know why the color red makes us stop the way it does, or why we see the color blue and it looks like it's welcoming. Those particular things are the way that they are. And even if you and I can't explain those particular things, it doesn't make the theory behind it, even though we can't explain it, any worse or any better.
Well, it would. For me, a fundamental part of science. So two things. One, I want to reorient you for a second.
Let me say this: a fundamental part of science is that it's repeatable.
Yes.
We do that is what we agree. So, okay, let's staple that down. And when it comes to the drill-based approach, it has been shown to be repeatable over a longer period.
You can say that. You can say that. That's fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, over a longer period of time. And that's not to say that the eco approach doesn't work.
Right. It's been tested for a while. It clearly creates some level of skill, right?
Expertise.
Okay. So, all right. So, one, I want to reorient you for a second and I'm here for it. We're not debating yet. Your goal right now is to recapitulate to me what ecological dynamics is, and then we can get into
100%.
So and then two, as far as like scientific theories, like to me the way I see science is like we're working with models, right? And we're working with models to understand and explain the world we see around us and all the things that we see happen and the different phenomena. And all models are wrong. Some are useful. Some are better than others. And usually we look at where models break down. What things can they not explain to move forward and have new paradigms that now this old theory couldn't explain the X and Y and Z. And so now we move forward to a new theory that it can explain X, Y, and Z. It's better than that, but now it can't explain D.
Right.
And then we move forward from there, right? So it's not necessarily to say like, all models can explain something, but I think at a fundamental level, things that models can't explain are weaknesses of the model. And then the question just becomes, can we find a better model, a better theory? You agree with that?
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you.
Okay, great. So as far as coordination, we get to this thing where, are you familiar with Bernstein?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so Bernstein, he's a Russian scientist way back in the day. He started his original research back in the 20s.
Was his research on ballet?
He might have done some research on ballet. I'm not familiar with any research he did on ballet.
Okay.
His famous study was on blacksmiths. And so the famous study goes, he's studying like novice and expert blacksmiths. And this is way back, right? We don't have videos back then. So he or barely have videos. So basically he sets up this motion tracking thing. You've got a hammer and you put some basically some reflective lights on it, right? And reflective lights on the hammer, the hand, the elbow, and different joints. And then you're essentially taking pictures quickly of expert blacksmiths hitting something, and novice blacksmiths, they're hitting something, right? They're working the metal. And so one of the things we'd expect to see, the experts should be much more accurate with their hammer strikes. Okay, we see that. But what we see is the experts are creating that more stable effect of this more accurate strike through actually greater variability in their joint movements. They use greater motor flexibility to accomplish even a more precise task. And so this is sort of some of the foundational stuff that variability is an important thing in this approach. And he coined this thing, he calls it degrees of freedom problem.
That's right? Degrees of freedom. That's what it'd be in engineering, degrees of freedom.
Right. So think about we've got these, it depends how you count, but around 200 joints. Each of them usually have a few degrees of freedom. Each of those have infinite positions, right? There's not a discrete number of positions. These joint angles are continuous. And so you think of the complexity of the positioning of just the human body.
One moment. So you're saying it's not discrete? It's not.
No.
It's not.
It's continuous.
Okay.
Right, because I would say this was a fact. I believe this quite strongly. Is there a discrete number of elbow positions that I can have? It's continuous, right? I can go from this angle to this angle, and there's a continuous number of infinitesimal slices between those ranges that I can go into, right? That's right. And then so now we combine that infinite number with this infinite number.
Okay,
with this
listen,
infinite number.
I'm glad you. This is where the two approaches differ. Because, and you know this on the strength and conditioning side, when you train at a certain angle of incidence, you get strong only at that angle of incidence.
Specificity.
A specificity. So,
well, you get strongest at that angle.
Strongest at that angle. So what I do and what we do on the drilling side is we go, and then we build out as we've gotten strong at each of those indices to create a stronger continuum. The ecological approach deals with the continuum as a whole to get stronger at the whole movement pattern.
I think,
that's my understanding of what you're saying.
I wouldn't really say that.
Okay,
because I wouldn't say that at all, actually.
Okay, all right. No, I'm trying to see where you're getting at in terms of the movement and the expert strike, because some of what you're saying when it comes to degrees of freedom at the joint, some of that is you're going to dial your way all the way back to genetics.
We have solutions to these problems. So this is the problem, right? Is you think this.
What problem are you speaking of?
The degrees of freedom problem.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. So we have infinite positions of this joint, and then if you think about how many positions can my arm have,
I don't agree with them being infinite. They're not infinite. They're finite. They're finite.
How is it discrete? How would you argue that that's not? That's there's a finite, there's a range.
Yeah, it's finite. It's not infinite.
I guess here's the thing. Like, so this gets into math that is like a little beyond my pay grade, right? But there's different sizes of infinity. Not all infinities are the same.
No, all infinities are the same. All infinities,
No.
they go.
So, like, for instance, okay, here's an example, right? So let's say this angle, let's say that's 0 degrees of flexion. It's not, but
Okay.
whatever. Let's call that 0, and let's call this 180, right?
Yes.
So I have an elbow flexion angle between 0 and 180 degrees of flexion. You could call that's a finite number, right? 180 degrees of flexion. But when we think about the number of positions of elbow flexion, it could be 0.1 degrees of flexion. It could be, it's not just like 0.1 degrees
Okay,
at
so
a time.
Here's the. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
It still is finite because it has a finite cap from 0 to 180. This is more of a calculus issue. Okay, it's more of a differential issue. I took Cal 1, 2, 3 differential equations. I did all the mechanical engineering stuff, and you know this from kinesiology. Yes, we can say 1A, 1AA, 1AAA, 1AAAAAA, 1A, 1B, 1B, and go slow to the point where it seems like it's infinite, but it's not infinite because it has an endpoint. So within this range, there's an endpoint. It's not infinite.
Well, let's move on from this. Like, I think it, because this is like, it gets into just pure math stuff, right?
Pure math,
Neither
pure
of us,
math.
we're not mathematicians.
So
you know?
here's what I've done a great deal of math, but here's what
Me too. I love math, but it's like,
here's what I'll say. We can say that there are a numerous amount of positions between 0 and 180
yes,
to the point where we could explore those positions and never get to the end in our lifetime. We agree. Yes.
Okay, yeah, we'll take that.
We'll take it.
I'm tempted to go more, but I don't want to get sidetracked and just go into this one thing, right?
Correct.
Because the take of it, again, we can say there's a huge number of different positions the elbow could be at. And now you take that huge number and you multiply it by, in any of those elbow positions, we could have any wrist position.
Correct.
And any finger position and any pronation or supination. And they're all, so when we think of the complexity of the different, even just the different positions we could have, it's an enormous number. You're multiplying these together. So now that creates this problem where there's so many degrees of freedom, right? That how could this all be top-down controlled by the brain that it's going to control these 500-600 degrees of freedom with what I would argue are infinite positions, and you would argue are just a very large number of them, right? That's a problem. That's what we call the degrees of freedom problem. And again, like in the traditional approach, it's hard to explain. You can't really explain. Okay, try.
No, I don't have to try. I can tell you.
Okay.
It's based upon the same model that Harvard uses when they teach in the case studies method. We know once we look at a competitive environment, we know that out of all those neural patterns that are available, there are a set number that are occurring with a high level of probability over and over and over again. And what we do is we dial ourselves in in the drilling space of paying attention to those top 3, top 4, top 10, or top 5, because those are the ones that happen all the time. And it's not possible per the chronological landscape of athlete development to handle or tackle everything. So we have to handle the things that we may see or may encounter, or the counters to those particular things, in order to do well in that environmental space. Do I need to rephrase it differently? Case in point.
I disagree.
No, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to disagree, and this is why the low levelness of no-gi Brazilian jiu-jitsu allows you to attack all of those particular things, because it hasn't been dialed in enough to make it a marksman type sport. It's just so much variability in it. So you can attack the variability and do well and be fine. But when you reduce those options, it becomes more of a more difficult sport, not just relying on skill, but then relying on the forcing of things to happen on a physiological level. Now strength and conditioning matter, not just tactics and technique.
Again, it's like a little bit, it's hard to like, this is why I wanted to do it in this way, where it's hard to have an argument at this point because I don't feel like you really understand the depths of ecological dynamics.
No, I understand ecological dynamics in a great way. I mean, I've studied Aristotle and everybody else, affordances. I don't have any level of misunderstanding of it. I got a great background of it. I teach exercise science, kinesiology at the university level. I understand exactly what you're saying. I even understand the biomechanics and the engineering of it. What I also want you to understand is this. There is a point when it comes to the acquisition of expertise, not skill. The ecological approach will allow you to gain skill. It will not allow you to gain a high level of expertise. It doesn't allow it because it attacks too much stuff. If you tie deliberate practice to the ecological approach, which you can, you're doing the eco approach and then somebody is watching you. In order for deliberate practice to be deliberate practice, it needs what's called inter-observer reliability. Somebody on the outside has to be watching. I can't give the game and sit back and allow you guys to play the game. I got to give the game and I got to be dialed in on this group and this group only and watching, and the improvements will come. You can improve a great deal utilizing deliberate practice with the eco approach. Problem. You still can't teach a world-class tennis serve like that. Yeah, you could tell somebody, here's a game. You take the ball, throw it up in the air, hit it over the net, and then do it faster. But you're gonna have to create a neural pattern in order to do it. And even that blacksmith approach problem, there's a neural pattern that the blacksmith has gone over and over and over again that allows them to do that. Your argument may be, I don't know, is that nobody taught him how to do that. He learned it in an ecological situation.
No, it's not.
I don't think, but I don't think that's the argument. I think he learned how to do it and laid down the neurological pathways in the myelin sheath, and that's why he's good at doing it. And then there's another point. If we dial into the athletics, he may have a certain range or his femur may be longer than another person's femur, or his tibia may be longer than another person's, or his arms may be longer than what allows him to become elite. Because let me tell you something, the propensity of becoming elite, if you want to look at affordances of being 7'2", 6'11", is greater than being 5'6".
Sure.
But that doesn't mean you can't be an elite level basketball player at 5'6".
So again, I really want to get, I don't feel like you understand.
It's just a feeling. It'll go away.
Right. I tried to like articulate your understanding in ways that you said.
Listen,
like I feel like I understand your.
I understand. Right? I understand your feeling of it. I'm telling you, I have a very good understanding of it. If you don't feel that I have a good understanding of it, that is at this particular point of the conversation. That's either something that you're gonna have to get over, get by, or we're gonna have to get through.
I want to get through it, but then we gotta talk about it, right?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So, let's come back to the expertise thing because I want to talk about that, and I've got evidence for it.
Before we do that,
but yeah,
what part of the eco CLA approach and the research part do you think that I'm misunderstanding?
A lot of it.
Yeah, but it's not a lot of it. But
there's so much depth here.
I got it.
There's so much depth.
Give me one or two parts.
I mean, the Bernstein thing. This is like the most foundational, like basic stuff. You know, like, are you familiar with attractors? You know, like
what tractors are you talking about?
It's really complex, so we got to just start like kind of build it up. You know,
you asked me am I familiar with the tractor. I don't know what tractors you're talking about. What tractors?
But I know you don't. That's why I'm trying to explain the stuff, right? And I feel like you're not there yet, and let's get there, and then we can kind of have
Here's the thing. Listen, I don't want to get caught up in the gotcha moments. Okay,
not at all. That's not what I'm trying to do.
but here's the thing. When you said, "Are you familiar with attractors?" I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, man. When you say track, right?
Okay.
So
yeah.
So don't do the gotcha moment. Just explain.
It's not trying to be a gotcha moment.
That's how it's coming off. And
I've apologized.
And let me say this. And the reason why it's coming off like that is because I want to be completely honest with you, man. I'm very well read in this particular space. I'm not well read in this space. I've been doing coaching and deliberate practice. And
it's not time.
Right. So I'm cool with it. If there's something that you don't feel that I understand, I have enough humility to take the lesson if you have something to teach me.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get in the gotcha moment thing. All right. Because I didn't do you like that.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to, and I apologize if it felt like I was. And likewise, I've got a lot of things to learn from you. You're an Olympian, dude, would I love to have a judo lesson from you? Even if it was some traditional stuff, absolutely, bro. Absolutely. You can throw me around for 2 hours and I'll have a great time. I wouldn't even throw you,
but I just talked to you about throwing, and I think you get it all. But help me fill in the gap of what I'm missing.
Totally. Right. So that Bernstein problem, right? It's kind of there's many foundational things, like we talked about the loan of information problem. This degrees of freedom problem is essentially if coordination is stored patterns in the brain, how could it encapsulate all this complexity of all these degrees of freedom to even do very simple movements? And so the solution we arrive at in ecological dynamics is this, we call it freezing of degrees of freedom, right? So the idea is, two things: freezing degrees of freedom and coordinative synergies. So basically the idea is, okay, you've got, say, 600 degrees of motor freedom. And that's just in your body, right? We're not even talking about in relation to another person. But man, that's crazy complex. But so what we can do is let's kind of get rid of some. Let's ignore some, right? So say you're skiing. And we see this all the time. I'm sure when I mention this, you're going to say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Because you do something new, say it's skiing, and what's the first thing you see with beginners? They don't know what to do with their arms. Their arms aren't doing anything intelligent, right? They're busy trying to figure out the basic stuff of what we would call assembling these coordinative synergies, these coordinative structures of what's going to accomplish the most basic thing we need to do of moving forwards, right? And if we think about all the degrees of freedom of the spine, the arms, the hands, it's that's overwhelming at the beginning. Let's just start to work on probably the legs are the most important thing. So let's figure out how we can use our legs in ways that are intelligent. And rather than trying to figure out kind of the toes and the ankles and the knees and the hips all separately, let's kind of bring some things together. Let's join some of these degrees of freedom. Let's link them. That's the coordinative synergy. And then let's work with that whole thing. And then later, as we get more skilled, we can start to break those apart and now have the toes and the feet and the knees and the ankles. They all start to work together more and do more intelligent things. And you start to see the arms get involved because you're skiing, your arms are still important. There's still things they can do to help you, right? And so we're bringing all of those together. So in ecological dynamics, we see movement patterns as not being stored in the brain and probably not being possible to store in the brain, but rather we think of it as a self-organizing system, right? So it's rather than your brain telling your body what to do and sending all these commands to the joints that, again, at some level, it actually happens, right? We know motor commands come down from the brain to the rest of the body, but rather than thinking about it in a top-down way, we can also think of it as kind of a bottoms-up and everything working together. And the movement patterns that happen are just expressions of how everything is interacting, right? So it's the neurons, the joints, the tendons, the muscles, the environment, the things acting on you, your intentions, your attention, the things you're trying to do, they all interact together in these really complex ways. And those expressions of that interaction are the movements we see. Are you following me with that? That's like...
Of course. I mean, it's part of attention, focus, intensity, and arousal, getting feedback from the environment, being able to express where you need to be, basically in terms of in kinesthetic awareness, basically.
Yeah, and
it's how but it's how you perceptively, it's your conceptual framework of how you see kinesthetic awareness being developed. It's not for you. It's not a top down. It's a
bottoms up more,
highway. It's a highway. Where for me, I believe it's
exactly. That's a big difference from both the approaches, right? It's
100%
top down versus like the way we describe it is like we don't even think about like the brain itself. We're like, forget about the brain and like all this. Again, it's an important thing. It's important. We're not saying 100%. It's not important, but 100%. We're saying forget about only focusing the brain. And let's now think about the brain and the nervous system in the body in an environment.
Let me ask you this question, because this is and I think that I have a better understanding of what you're saying. On the drill-based approach allows me to do the following. I have a core movement, okay, that may not
like what, the Ushimata or
let's just say let's not even call anything. Let's just call it a core movement. Okay. And then
I'm sorry, just like what sort of core movement? Are we talking posture? Are we like what?
Let's say a scissor sweep.
Okay.
I have a scissor sweep. I'm practicing scissor sweep.
All right.
And then I have the scissor sweep inside of the dynamic of play. Okay. Our approach is that on a metacog level, this person can always look at what's happening here and go back and check to make this as close to this as possible. I think I don't know, I'm just checking. The argument and discussion is that this will never be like this. You're just concerned about you just tell them scissor sweep, here's what I want you to do, and the other person, and then they figure out how to make it work. I'm giving them an ideal that they're gonna bounce off of a reel back and forth. You don't need the ideal because you're only concerned about the reel.
Like, we're getting a lot closer now. So so with the scissor,
give me 1 second. I gotta use the restroom.
Go for it.
Not a coffee.
I'm gonna go as well, actually.
All right, I'm back.
Okay.
So I want to say that I'm not missing what you're putting down.
It sounds like we're starting to click.
And I got your original question that you asked me before, which is, so I like to have a standard
like an ideal technique.
Here's how I want you to carry the football. Here's how I want you to cut. Here's how I want you to get to the hole. Here's how I want you to go to the numbers and cut the field. Here's how I want you to kick the ball in the top right part of the goal. Here's how I want you to do it.
Yeah.
Now, you can do it in the environment of play, but damn it, I want it close to this.
Sure.
Because we've tested it enough to know that this works. Case study method. Okay. That's the drilling method. Okay. And I heard Greg say this, and I see your argument. Your argument is, what the hell do we need that for when all we're concerned is, can they do it? So let them just go do it and let them figure out, tell them you want to score. You want them to go to the, and just let them, I want you to carry the ball and don't fumble it.
Right. And so we're not saying you gotta chuck the thing and like never say that again, right? And let's come back to the scissor sweep. That's important. But like the idea is when we have these idealized techniques, right, of like how to hold a football, there's two things. It's one, it's that discounts a lot of individual differences, right? You have your 7'10" guy and your 4'2" guy and your guy with big hands and your guy with small hands and your guy with really strong bicep, maybe your guy with really strong lats, and like there's there's really not the one ideal technique from
Okay,
our
so
perspective.
let me say this, and
Yeah.
I want us to hammer this point home, which is outside of our approaches, but should be one of the fabricators on the approaches, which is a huge problem that I have on a personal level because I'm a traditional martial artist.
Okay. What do you mean?
So I'm gonna tell you the ecological approach, especially in the no gi realm, it 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 doesn't teach a high level of discipline.
Okay.
There's a portion of discipline from the and I'm sure some people are going to balk at it because it's still old school. And I need people to understand that those who are listening that martial arts, okay, martial arts come off of the sword, all right? It is a martial art. The word martial means warlike. It is supposed to mimic the games that are warlike games. Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is why butt scooting is not good because the high ground is the best ground, not the low ground. You understand what I'm saying?
I'm with you on that, man.
It's the
Yeah.
antithesis. It's the
Yep.
antithesis of the war game. So the discipline of I say you do, we win is still it's still necessary, in my opinion, in the martial arts space. It's still necessary for me to say, hey, let me show you. You need to be quiet for a moment. You need to learn to observe. You need to learn how to take in this information. You need to learn how to provide the information back. And you can also do it in the environment of play. But there's still a portion of proficiency, efficiency, testing, I would even go to the point of discipline, paying attention that I think sometimes gets lost in the eco space within the martial arts community.
Totally could be. Yeah, absolutely could be.
Which is maybe tangential to what we're talking about, but I just wanted to
Yeah, that's
people are listening.
sure. I think I don't see anything special about why that would have to be different in in an intelligent application of the ecological approach. Because again, it's like
There you go.
there's people that are just like screwing around with games, and like there's a lot of my colleagues that like are really into play, and I love that. And like there's different contexts where we're not talking about like, yeah, let's have this guy try to win the Olympics. What's the best thing for him? And again, outside of those performance environments, maybe play is much more valuable.
And I agree.
Yeah, yeah. But like with the CLA, we're again like intelligent applications of it. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to do things like, how do we, we think this is better. Here's the reason why. Here's the science, and
Correct.
let's apply it. And just like you're doing, let's test it. Let's refine it. Let's find, like you were mentioning earlier, let's refine these games, right? A lot of these games
Right.
we're just coming up with, they're a lot newer, right? So we got to test them, see how does that one work? How does this one work? How do they interact together? Who does that work for? In what situations, right? It's, again, we're like trying to do things in a really intelligent way, and there's a lot of similarities in how we're trying to apply what we're doing. Because again, we're always trying to come to the same thing of like, how do we get people better at the sport and more skilled?
The rough thing for me is I am not with my higher end clients, I'm not concerned about playing paintball. I'm concerned about creating marksmen.
Totally.
And
Totally.
I just I've not seen the ecological approach work with creating marksmen. I can put people in a group and I can put them in a small cohort on the mat. I can ask them to take somebody down and lift your leg up and do uchimata. But in order for them to learn how to do uchimata, I mean, a good Uchimata against Kenka Yotsu and Ai Yotsu against lefties, against righties, when the foot is a little bit inside, when the
Yep.
foot is a little bit outside, when your hand is inside, when your hand is outside, when your hand is like in order from off the lapel, bottom of the skirt, sleeve, at the tricep, like you are going to have to drill those movements like that over and over and over again to create some level of proficiency. And then use a CLA approach in a constraint-led randori situation where they're playing, where you say you can only do Uchimata. You can do Sasai to Uchimata, you can do Osoto to Uchimata, you can do a Uchi to Uchimata, but you can only throw Uchimata. Which
So
is where go ahead.
I'm going to throw you off a little bit here. I'm going to agree with you, actually. Like, I actually think from the research, if you're judging things by how the skill looks, you are not, the research is actually pretty clear, you are not going to get the skill. There's I believe Lee 2014 looked at like a tennis stroke, and they looked at like different kinematics of it.
This is why I mentioned the serve.
And it wasn't the serve. We'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to the serve.
They're practicing like a modified tennis stroke, they called it. It was in novices, to be fair. But they looked at like kind of the performance accuracy of like, okay, you throw them the ball, like how, or I forget actually how they were being served the ball, if they were being thrown. I think it was. But anyway, they have to hit a target. And then so you can measure the accuracy of how well they hit the target, how accurately. And then you can also look at the kinematics and see like how they're coordinating the action. And you also can have, what they did was they had 3 kind of independent coaches give them form scores, judging how well did that stroke look by their aesthetic criteria. And what you see is the form scores were much higher in the traditional approach. You have the things that, if you judge it by, I'm an expert, I know what a good Uchimata looks like, right? You are going to see worse effects by applying the constraints-led approach from like the current body of evidence. That's what the current body of evidence suggests. And it makes sense all the way down to the foundational level. You're not constraining self-organization in that way to even try to look like the Uchimata. What we're trying to do is create the effect of the Uchimata.
Right, the outcome.
We're focused on the outcome. And so the Uchimata may emerge, something else may emerge, but what we're seeing in general in the research is the outcome, the performance outcome in dynamic sports is better. We're learning faster. And I have for you 3 studies here. So Gray 2018, you can look into these later. Gray 2018, Gray 2020, and Caldera 2023 that are looking at quite high-level athletes. So both of Gray's studies, very interesting, well-done studies.
This is Rob Gray?
Rob Gray, yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I would say these are his best studies. And, you know, if you were to start somewhere as far as like getting into the actual research, this would be a great place to start with these 2 studies by Gray. I think the Caldera one, I didn't like how it was done as much. But in both of Gray's studies, he looked at competitive experienced baseball players with an average of 10 years, 10.4 years in one, and 9.7 years in the other of competitive playing experience, right? So these are high-level guys. Again, you can't get every study on international level athletes, but actually Caldera 2023 was 12 elite male volleyball players playing at the national and international level. And what you see in all of these studies is you get more performance improvements in the constraints-led approach. When we're judging by the performance, we're judging by the performance outcome, not by what does it look like. Like you're saying, yes. When we judge it by what it looks like, it seems pretty clear at every level, empirically and theoretically, it's going to look better when you're telling people what it should look like and having them refine by what it should look like. Yeah?
Yes.
We can go, I'll just kind of quickly tell you about just the Gray 2018 study, because I think it was really well designed. So you got 6 weeks, experienced baseball players. You put them in a virtual batting environment, and you give them the bat, and you're tracking it, 120 times a second. You're looking at the kinematics, and so they're being thrown these like virtual balls, right?
Okay.
They're trying to strike at the balls, and then they strike it, and it's modeling where the baseball would go, right, as accurately as they can. So essentially, obviously it's more representative if it was a real baseball environment, but doing it in a virtual environment allows you to control the variables a lot tighter, right? If you had a real baseball pitcher, you could use the same pitcher, but like he's going to fatigue. How do you know every throw is going to be the same, right? Like it's just another variable. And so in the study, they used a virtual batting environment for sort of those reasons. And they looked at, basically they have this whole group of baseball players, and they decide these guys have been hitting like too low. They've been hitting ground balls sort of for like a basically they're saying the paradigm in the MLB is changing, where we think people are going to get more on base and more home runs by hitting the ball higher. And so they target specifically this group of people that they're hitting the ball really low, but they're hitting it pretty hard. And they're experienced, they're expert players, basically. And then they give them 3 approaches. So they give them either internal focus cues. Are you familiar with Gabby Wolf's research, optimal theory, internal focus, external focus cues?
No. I'm familiar with intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Yeah. Yes. She's done a lot of research. So optimal theory, it stands for optimizing performance through intrinsic motivation and attention for learning. This was a 2016 paper theory from Gabby Wolf and Rebecca Luthwaite. And it's a really interesting paper because it's, one, it was great. It was really great. And 2, it's based on an information processing framework. Like, as far as I know, Gabby Wolf, like, really is in that camp. But basically what she was saying is like, look, our modern theories of motor learning aren't taking into account kind of emotional factors of motivation and attention. So let's kind of add, like, she did a lot of research over a long time looking at, like, in particular, focus of attention cues. But then she also kind of synthesized stuff with expectancies and autonomy supportive language. Basically, so the internal external focus thing is, if you give people, again, this is even in the traditional framework, if you give people internal focus cues where they're hitting the baseball, right? But you tell them where you're gonna, like, you give them cues on like how their body should move, right? Based on your expert knowledge as a coach to like hit the baseball better, right? So you're giving, the cues are telling them how they should move their body. That's 100%. Internal focus cues. External focus cues are effect focused. So you're still telling them how to hit the baseball, but now instead of telling them how to like move their elbow, you're telling them more like where they should aim the bat or like where they should aim the ball. So it's more the cues you're giving. You've still got a ideal technique that you're guiding people towards, but you're just doing it with cues that are focused on the effect of the movement. Right. And then the third group used a constraints-led approach. So both those two groups, they had like, he interviewed some expert hitting coaches, national level, 10 years of experience. And in the interview, he came up with like kind of 3 of their best cues to give to people for the internal focus group. And then for the external focus group, I believe he just kind of modified those. I forget if it was with the coaches or not, but he modified them essentially to be the same cues, but focused on the effect of the movement. And on the constraints-led approach group, all they did is he gave them barriers to hit the ball over, right? And so they all get the same little pamphlet of like, hitting the ball higher is good. You should try to hit the ball higher. And then the internal focus and external focus groups, they're given these cues, right? And taught traditional way. And the constraints-led approach group, they just have to hit the ball over the barrier. When they hit the ball over the barrier moves back, it gets a little harder. If they miss, the barrier moves forward, it gets a little easier. So it's like kind of like a challenge point sort of thing, if it's challenging them to the right degree. And they're given no feedback. And then what you find is, significantly more improvement.
They're given no verbal feedback.
Yes. They're given no augmented feedback. Yes.
Right. Because the feedback, the biofeedback is the outcome.
Yes. They're not given any feedback by the coach. right? The
Correct.
coach isn't telling them, hey, you did that wrong, or you could do that better in any way for the CLA group.
It's more deep work than deliberate practice. Go ahead. I'm with you.
And so you get better
Now, now,
results.
now, now here's what I'm going to tell you, which I tell other people who come to me with
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Those individuals in grade study, they were college level athletes, I believe. Okay. I if I saw it very quickly. Did you look at the
Okay.
abstract? Collegiate? Yes.
I can find it for you in a few
It
seconds
should be an
here.
abstract. Yes.
I'm not sure. I mean, he's from Arizona State.
Abstract. Yep.
42
Participants.
experienced male right-handed baseball position players were screened for participation. All testing and training were completed in the baseball season. The mean number of years competitive playing experience was 10.4. It doesn't say.
Doesn't say? Okay. I
No.
thought they were collegiate based when I looked it up. So those individuals who are using a CLA approach, very similar to judo, have already been trained in the previous approach, which is why I
Okay.
always espouse a
Okay.
hybrid approach.
Okay.
And per my academic research, all right, yes, if they come to the table with more, you'll get more in that eco approach. And when you put those individuals inside of the eco approach with the other people who haven't trained like that, they are actually benefiting from the drill based learners. In furtherance, when the eco approach people, when they go compete against the drill based approach people, you know how you go to I don't know if you've been in a dojo or an environment where somebody's going to a training camp or they go into a couple tournaments and then they come back and they've gotten better. The people who don't pay to go compete, they're actually siphoning off of those other people's technique. Those people are paying to go get better, and then when they come in the dojo gets better, and they're pulling off of their technique, but only one person is making the investment,
Sure.
right?
Okay.
The same thing happens. A lot of the people inside of the eco space are pulling from the people in the drill space and getting better. Now, can is that to say that the people in the drill space aren't getting better from the eco space? They most likely are. My argument is always going to be, as it is with anybody, is when it comes to creating world class, elite level, top notch athletes that are at the top of the pyramidal structure, eco hasn't done that yet.
I would explain that as just there's less of it so far. And,
Yeah, that's it.
sample sizes, things
Sample
take
size.
time.
Correct.
And then, like you're saying, then when people like D are now winning big competitions, it's like, well, now you can say, oh, he was drilling before and then he used this approach. And so it's going to take even longer
It's even
to
longer.
see like
But somebody
pure
totally.
eco students that there are so much less of, starting to, like you said, good things take time.
100%, 100%, 100%. And I like the fact that there is another approach that people are using. It's fun. I just in my space. So I'm gonna be very transparent with you. Dr. Chris Round, who I do some training with, we have a cohort of athletes that we train for the 2028 Olympics. We were having a spirited discussion because he had been a client of mine for some time. He was a client of mine, but a student of Jimmy Pedro's.
Okay.
He was explaining to me why we should start using the ecological approach. I was hammering hard on that shit ain't gonna get us what we need and blah blah blah. He then said, I need you to understand this. He said, the Olympics in 2028 is in the United States, which means we don't need to create top 16 players in the world. He said, we need to create the top players in the country, and we got 3.5 years to do it. And I was like, my approach is not going to work in 3.5 years. It's not possible. The eco approach can get us to a point where they can win the trials and become Olympians in 3.5 years because of the population pool that we're dealing with of judoka inside the United States. Which means which model is better for us to use per the outcome that we need in 2028? Guess which one that is? The ecological approach.
So you guys are gonna run like fully tasks or like mostly tasks or
He is fully tasked. Well, I would say he's 90% tasked. There are some things that we're not letting go because of how we learn grip fighting. I learned from Eddie Liddy, he learned from Jimmy Pedro. There's certain grip fighting things that you gotta A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. You have to, because you can't switch your feet and do things like there's certain things that if you do at a certain level in judo, you're gonna get thrown right away. So there's certain things that we can't allow them to make those particular mistakes. We don't want them figuring that out. Other than that,
can I have a little thing there and like you
yes,
say
yes,
a little thing? I think like in our approach,
yes,
like it's a reorientation, right? Like it's still taking all the knowledge and expertise you have as a coach for knowing those things of like if you do this when they do that, like you're screwed, right?
correct.
Like we know you're going to be screwed most of the time when that happens. So then if those things are so important, then it's functionally important. It's going to emerge in the games and
Or gamify it.
we can approach those with tasks in a more effective way, right? So say okay, so like very basic grip fighting example, something I tell people, and you can tell me if like I'm off of left field here, but you know, if you have a collar grip and someone else doesn't have a collar grip, they're pretty screwed.
They're screwed.
Right? They need to immediately like break your grip or get their own like fast. So so we could say, okay, well you need to drill that specific thing because that's so important of like getting however you want to do that. But we could also say that's a really important functional thing, right? So let's play that task. You start with the collar grip. He starts without it.
We
go.
do that. We do that 100%.
Right.
Now, here's the other thing. There's a skill of how to break off grips. I have to teach those people how to do that. Like you have to do that, which is why I say the eco approach is it's a lot more adaptable and has the utilization factor is higher in the no gi. On the gi side, just to going over the grip breaks and the way you got to break off, and it's you have to drill some of those particular things.
I disagree. I think you can't. Again, it's clear we both agree you can drill them.
You
right?
can drill them, yes.
But like, what I would say, and it's really interesting that we're talking about grip breaks and grip fighting, because for me, in the traditional approach, I was terrible at grip fighting. And, despite studying, a number of top level instructionals on like what you should do and what the grip hierarchy is and grip supremacy, grip advantage, blah, blah, blah. And those things felt good at a cognitive level to understand. And it's helpful to have an intention, right? But I was still really struggling with those. And for me, it was a reorientation of like, let's play the game of just develop a strong grip on your partner. And that's it. And so like with the grip breaks, what I would say in this new approach is like, rather than if you just drill the break, like we can still show them, right? Like obviously you're going to say at a biomechanical level for most people, you're like, probably this direction is a better way to break these sort of grips. And I like these movements. I think these sort of movements are very effective, or the most effective.
And I don't have a problem.
Type of grip.
I'm in agreement with what you're saying and where you're going. What I had a disagreement was when Souders was talking with Mike, was that he was acting like that part of the instruction wasn't necessary. That piece of the instruction, that verbal piece of the instruction, it's sometimes there are certain times when you got to give a little bit of instruction. You got to show some stuff. You got to go over it once or twice to get it down, and because you're still there's watch this. Drilling is CLA at the
Yeah.
far
I know.
end of the
I
spectrum.
agree, actually. I agree.
Okay. At the
Yep.
far end of the
I
spectrum.
totally agree.
Now, and I say it like this. Okay, so let me say this. Oh man, I have a wonderful student in my dojo. Okay. He has autism. He's nonverbal. The eco approach is great for him. Like for him to sit down and do a move, it ain't gonna happen. It's not gonna happen.
Right.
But I
Right.
can put him in a circle, join hands. We can play the foot sweep drill. Whoever goes down first, then you're out. You're on the wall.
Right.
He's laughing and having a good time.
Yeah.
The kids are learning how to move their feet. They're getting
Yeah.
all that stuff down.
Right.
All of it. When I'm specifically trying to teach Ouchigari, and this is the I'm giving the bad part of my approach. When I'm specifically trying to teach Ouchigari and going through the steps, I got to put him on the wall for a moment while I attend to the other kids, which is not a great thing. Which then has because I believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that has nothing to do with race, and it has everything to do with making and creating opportunities for everybody to be involved. The bottom line is that the ecological approach, when I have those type of learners in my environment, allows everybody to be involved. And kids who are from the age of 3 to 11 years old, I have no aspiring Olympians in that space. And the eco approach works great.
Yeah.
Now, that's pedagogy. When it comes to andragogy, the training of adults, with kids, I meet kids where they are. With adults, I meet them and take them where they need to go. The adults who aspire to be super proficient and are willing to take what I perceive as being the longer, better route, I perceive. It doesn't mean that it is. It's I perceive it to be, right? I will take them through the drilling space. And I'll tell you this, my older adults appreciate more drilling, less eco.
For sure. For sure.
I think that some people will probably think we're nerding out a little bit on this discussion, but I don't want anybody to miss what Coach Bren, yes?
Bren.
Bren. Coach
Bren.
Bren and I are saying, I wanted to call you Coach V, but I didn't want to.
Coach B is easier.
Yeah, I didn't want to do the Gary V thing. I don't want to do Gary V thing. Coach V. And I don't want you to miss what you and I are saying, which is don't throw any approach out. Now, I understand that Coach V has to. How old are you, my man?
32.
32. Listen, you're a young dude. You're in your research space, man. You're learning, you're coaching, you got your own business. You have to pick a thing and be good at. You need to be an expert at. You have to pick a thing and be an expert at it. You have to. You can't be like, oh, I'm good at everything. No, you need to be good at your thing. And I understand your approach and your position on it, and you ain't wrong, my man. What I want people to understand is that your job is to meet the people where they are and to provide your clientele what they need. If you are running a school, okay? If you're running a school and you know that your school is not the type of environment where you're going to be able to hammer home, sit in the pocket, do these reps and do these things over and over again, and the people will leave, you got to make some adjustments. Yeah. My place, the people know that I'm hardcore on deliberate practice. I say it from day one. I say it from when they sign up. I put you on a dummy. In the first month, you don't even touch anybody in my place. You're on a dummy. Armbar drill, armbar technique, armbar switch, near belly near side, near belly far side, rolling armbar to ukitami, and it would go. On the scissor sweep.
You're building those foundational patterns
that we can use for the systems that I have created on the judo side that most people will see in that particular environment. Going back to the scissor sweep. For me, the scissor sweep for me isn't a scissor sweep. I tell people, what's the number one rule of the arm bar? To control the arm. What's the number two rule of the arm bar? Don't focus on the arm. What's the number three rule? To focus on the steps. That's it. My thing is focus on the steps. For scissor sweep for me is lapel, feet, sleeve, plant foot, shrimp, knee cut across, lock and low, slide, leg sweep, pin.
Right.
All based upon the principles of kumikata, kazushi, sakuri, and kake in terms of making a throw work or making a movement work. If my kids are rolling and I don't see them putting lapel, feed, sleeve, plant foot, shrimp, if I don't see them do the move the way that I taught the move, I am going to lose my shit. I don't want deviation.
Sure.
I don't want freelancing. Now, that's different than the eco approach. I don't want that. I want this, like this. And what I want them to figure out in my constraints-led approach is I want them to figure out how to make that work in that environment, how to order the chaos, which is what drilling does in my approach. It orders the chaos. Now, the eco approach, you learn how to function within the chaos.
Yeah.
It's not.
Okay, so great. I'm loving this. We are getting so far. This is awesome. So two things. One, I want to go back really quick when we were mentioning.
Let me say this. It is 4:18. I have to be done at 4:40.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
I can always do a part two.
Yeah, that could be fun. I'd be super open to that. So I just want to say, go back when we were saying, like, you mentioned, like, drills are an extreme of the CLA and TAS. What we're saying is, like, just for the people in the audience, in a way, everything is a task. You could see everything as a task. And when you're drilling, you could see the task is just do the movement like this with this person doing that.
Right. And part of it is because I said so. on the martial arts side, right? On the discipline side, right?
Because I think it will be good because I have this expertise, blah, 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 right? And then now to, like, go back to the scissor sweep thing, right? So in the traditional approach, we've got all these steps, right? You've got all these steps that you're looking for that for you, this is a correct implementation of the scissor sweep is going to have to go through these steps. If there's no kazushi, where's the scissor sweep, right? And for us, the scissor sweep is, or any sweep, it's an expression of these interacting dynamics.
So let me say this for the people who are listening. That is called irimi kazushi in judo, which is instead of making the move work, you feel the move and then the move works based upon your kinesthetic awareness of the movement dynamic that is going on at the time. I'm just talking to my judo folks. You are 100% correct. And that is what, on the judo side, on the static side, when you're doing uchikomis, the throw never looks like it looks in the environment. You do it like that, so you have mental representation of when that opportunity comes up, but you have to do the randori in order to apply it. It doesn't work without the randori. It doesn't work without the play. But go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, we're really like constructing now. Yeah, so for us, it's just an expression of the interacting dynamics, and rather than trying to force it to look that way, we're thinking of the body. This is self-organizing thing.
I understand.
It's like, here's you're in the closed guard. You got to find a way to, like, get your partner down, right? The scissor sweep is a way to accomplish that goal. But there's also all sorts of other ways to accomplish that goal. And there's all sorts of complexities and all sorts of information that people have to attune to that tells you when that opportunity for action, that affordance is present, right? And so we think a lot about helping people search through this ocean of informational variables of what is going to tell you when you can do a scissor sweep. For us, it's a really complex combination of information of not just kinesthetic and proprioceptive information, but also visual information, audible information, everything put together that we search through all those different arrays of ambient energy patterns, and we find the things, or we start to move towards the things that really specify and tell us whether we can pull off the sweep. And sometimes it's going to look like a scissor sweep, and sometimes it's going to be a totally different thing. And for us, we think, based on a lot of evidence, some theoretical and some empirical now,
some anecdotal.
And some anecdotal as well, but whatever.
No, it's okay. That matters too, especially in the early stages.
It's true. It's absolutely true. We think that you're going to get more performance improvement. Again, not form. We both agree. If you want it to look like that certain way, you're doing ballet, you're doing gymnastics, you've got a judge that's telling you how the thing needs to be done, and that's your sport. Well, you got to drill.
Let's time out. Let's move into the. And I want you to go back. Just pause for a moment. There's a concomitant relationship between how it should look and making sure it works. Case in point, if you're in a bench press competition, the bench press isn't done the right way, you're not gonna get the 3 with lights. If you're in a deadlift competition,
sure.
if you're snatching or you're cleaning, like a snatch has to look a certain kind of way, otherwise it ain't gonna pull off at all.
I mean, we have different things, right? Like when we talk about the lights, that's not just an aesthetic thing anymore. That's a performance thing, right? Yes. You didn't accomplish the performance goal if you don't get those lights, right? So we can.
I got you. I'm with you.
And then the aesthetic part is the other parts of the performance. Like, okay, the elbows are locked out when you catch, because if you didn't, that's not a snatch. That's not a successful snatch. But okay, you lock the elbows, you stand up, you hold it. You get your 3 seconds, you get your white lights. How you accomplish that, all sorts of ways that you could accomplish that.
Yeah, we agree on that. And we talked about the aesthetics of a thing. If you, in terms of ballet, in terms of kata, like you have to do it a certain way to get that right. We got that.
Yeah.
Every approach has its constraints, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Strengths and weaknesses, absolutely.
Correct.
So yeah, we think that you get better improvements on the performance outcomes, particularly in dynamic sports, by focusing really on the performance and not how it looks. And like you're saying, there is a correlation between the two, but it kind of feels like for us, when we're focusing on the aesthetic, that's not the performance. There's a correlation, but it's not that great. Again, depending on the sport, right? Mm-hmm. In jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter what it looks like. If you get the arm bar, you got the arm bar. I was watching some of your videos yesterday. You have some vicious arm bars, man. And for me watching them, a lot of those didn't look super traditional with like the way you were doing it in the competition. But man, that sure was effective. That sure was. And
let me tell you something, man. And I used to practice those, even the ones when you kind of fly to the side.
Yeah.
Lloyd had me practice over and over again on a crash pads, putting the foot on the hip, falling to the side, putting the foot on the hip, falling to the side, getting a certain angle. I mean, I don't know if I could have learned that any other way or fell into that as much as I had someone who said, you know what, this will be a good movement for you, per you being a left-handed judo player. This is what we're going to work on, and we're going to spend time on refining these particular things.
Yeah,
I think this is a weakness that you can capitalize on. And I just don't see where that's why I say, yeah, you could put 1,000 monkeys in a room on a typewriter and one of them can type out the Iliad, but the amount of time that it'll take them to do so is just it just wouldn't be worth it at that level.
Yeah, and I really love that example because there's a lot of things I want to talk about that are really interesting. So one of the problems that I really have with this static drilling is it's think about it from a strength and conditioning perspective. When the other person isn't resisting and you do a toreando and you repeat that over and over, in our perspective, you're not developing skill effectively, the most effective way. And then, but unquestionably, you're not developing strength, you're not developing cardio. Like there's so much it feels like you're not developing anything really well. Versus like in that example, like you're doing a flying arm bar. That is a challenging movement, right? That physically is challenging. And so I think especially, and then, so you could set up a game where, okay, two guys, maybe you start them in the situation where you think that armbar is accessible, maybe not. But now the game is like either specifically or emphasized where you have to get a flying submission. Like you have to, standing, there's no takedowns, you have to submit the opponent. And you are going to self-organize, you're going to get people that do that. But then the question becomes like, what's the injury risk there? Right? Like that injury risk could be unacceptable.
Which was why, and this is why you have to lean into drilling when you have a situation like that.
Could be, and so like if you're drilling with your friend and a crash pad, and now you get to like do some practice before at an acceptable level of injury risk, like that may be what you have to do to like get those flying submissions effective. Again, like the tasks. Then the question with the task becomes like, could you change it in a way where the injury risk becomes reasonable and lower? But the answer may be no. And that certainly is a hard problem. And for instance, like maybe you're working with these judo athletes, you want them in 2028 Olympics, someone breaks an arm once, like
Done.
They're out. Like that's not
Done.
acceptable, And so maybe it becomes like, well, for these flying submissions, that could be a good asset for some of these people where, the injury risk in doing it live.
I'm going to tell you this. The first time I hit that move, I drilled it and I recorded it and I watched it. And I went to the tournament that weekend and I hit it.
Nice.
I never did the move in a live practice environment ever. The only time I've ever hit that move was in competition. The rest of the time, I've only drilled the steps of it. I drilled it from the ground, moving the thigh out, falling to the side, moving the thigh out, rolling. I've never done it full speed live. And let me say this particular point for the people who are listening. If anybody's played football before, I played football in 8th grade all the way through high school, and then I played for 5 years in college. We never, ever did kickoff return, punt return, field goal, or field goal block live, ever.
Really?
Never. You don't do it live, ever. The only time you do it live is in the game. You go over your lanes and your assignments. You do it you talk it out. You run down the field, but you never ever do kickoff or kickoff return live ever in practice.
And just to expand a little more, because of the injury risk.
Because of the injury,
you got all these people sprinting at each other.
Exactly. Because of the injury. So you're reduced to saying, you know what? It's best to drill these movements with no resistance because we can't. Let's say school costs, like Howard University costs $250,000. Okay, $50,000 a year. We're not risking a $50,000 a year athlete running
do
down
the flying
the field.
submission game,
Right, exactly. So there are times when, and this is what I just want people to leave this discussion. There are times when the drilling is supported as an option. Okay, there are times when the eco approach is supported as an option. I think that there's this space of there is a space where your high level athletes, like Olympic world level athletes, they can use the eco approach right now and be successful. Mm-hmm. And most of them are, because they're not doing as much drilling at that level. Yeah. Everything that they're doing is they're doing all tactical work based upon an overarching strategy. We call it in the pocket training. Wrestlers call it situationals. CLA is situational training. you got to move here. You keep them on the line, push them out of bounds, don't let them come back in. That's all it is. It's like though that's the type of practice that you're doing at that level with a high level of strength involved and a high level of conditioning involved.
Sure.
Really, that's the approach you're doing. But I think the argument from the community is, yeah, you can do it at that level, but they didn't get there doing that.
As in, like, they got there by drilling. Yeah.
At that level.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing so far in the research is the CLA is kind of winning. Again, when it's dynamic, performance-oriented sports, not aesthetic criteria, the CLA is kind of always winning. And so...
I vehemently disagree because it's a misnomer because you're looking at CLA per people who have drilled. Like CLA
You're
works
looking
better.
at everyone, you know.
Right.
So some of them have drilled. I guess you could
Yes.
say they've all drilled, but
Yes.
but also
CLA
with
looks-
novices.
Yeah, but
Novices haven't drilled.
yeah, yeah. I agree that you can use eco and CLA to get novices up to speed faster than the drillers. 100%. But here's what happens. They start out like this. They start out like this, and it's eco, boom, and the drillers. And it goes like this.
Sure. I think
But-
from the
but-
research, that's possible. But from the research, there doesn't seem like what we would expect if that was the case. What we would expect would be when we look at the experts, now the drilling is more effective, right?
See,
I know that's not what you're saying, actually.
no, yeah, no,
It's not what you're saying, but like we would expect that. And that's not what we've seen so far in any of the research.
the experts are at the point where they can do eco. It's like the same thing I talked about in my research. When I looked at training in a stabilization limited training environment, all right, if I took a person who can already do 10 reps of 225 and I train them in a stabilization limited training environment, after 3 weeks, they can come back and do 15 to 16 reps of 225. But if I had a person who only bench press 135 and they train in a stabilization limited training environment, they can't do 225 at all. They're not bringing enough to the what's the word I'm looking for? To the what is it called when you
Performance environment.
what is it called when you have the medicine? They're not bringing up to the prescription to get any benefits from it. They're not bringing enough. They don't have enough workable strength. Like even a novice in an eco environment, he'll become better. But it's just like this. If I have better ingredients, I'm going to make a better dish.
Right.
If I have world-class athletes in the eco environment, they're going to do better because the level of play inside the eco is just going to be better. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
And therefore eco works, but it works because we have better, higher level players.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is again where the approaches differ in like from your perspective, it's like it's about the ingredients. It's the performance environment is like what ingredients, what moves are you bringing to it that you're integrating them, right? For us, they're different things. And and it's not that you're running the patterns that we ingrained in the drilling and that those are the ingredients, but actually like the whole system, it works in context always. The context changes everything. And the fundamental skills, the ingredients per se, are not actually the movement patterns. They're like the perceptual and motor skills. Right? Like, what are we perceiving? How are we perceiving the opportunity for a sweep or a takedown? That, like, in context, in an embodied context, for us, that's the ingredients that, like, creates the excellent expert level people.
And it works. and
Yeah.
it works. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I will say this: there's two different. Well, there's many, but there's two different main models of what we call WASA, technical development, as it pertains to grip fighting and throwing. There's a Cuban-based model, then there's a United States-based model.
Hmm.
United States-based model is heavily influenced by people like Eddie Liddy, Steve Cohen, Jim Pedro Sr., Jimmy Pedro. I would even put myself in that category on a lower level as a newer person. And then there's a Cuban-based model. The Cuban-based model is based upon this. I'm going to teach you Seanagi and Sode, Surikomigoshi. And you are going to be able to do that from everywhere. No matter where you put your hands, you need to be able to do that throw.
Hmm.
The United States model is this. You learn this gripping sequence. And when you put your hands here, you know what throw to do. When you put your hands here, you know what throw to do. When you put your hands here, you know what throw to do. When you put your hands here, you know what throw to do. And don't put your hands anywhere else, goddammit.
Mm.
You put your hands there.
Yep.
Now, the Cuban-based model, which a lot of kids learn, especially in South Florida, man, they grab these other kids, especially my kids when they're early, they grab them and they bounce them off their head right away. Boom, 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 boom. Because they're in an environment where their job is to look for the opportunity and throw. As soon as you get the sleeve, when they say, "Cuando tú agarras la manga, dale." When you get the sleeve, you go. So they tell them, your kid is sitting there trying to work through these steps, bam, falling on their head. Parents are upset. They're leaving, kids quitting. They don't, right. Now, when the kids get older and the one kid can start ordering the chaos and that other kid can't get his hands where he needs to be in order to do his move, he gets frustrated. The other kid starts winning more and one kid drops out. We have seen this over and over again in judo because a lot of lower level coaches will have high success at the junior level, but not at the senior level, because winning at the juniors is not a predictor for winning at the seniors. You know this from from the research. Mm-hmm. But they'll all do good. But the fallout is at 14, 15 years old when they start liking the opposite sex, when they start getting involved in other sports, when the girls I want fingernails and I don't want to grab you. These are just the things. This is just a natural course of development for young people. And if you want to keep them from a business standpoint, sometimes doing the eco approach where they have success early is to your benefit.
Totally. And
Yeah,
and
and
that's
I don't see anything wrong with the eco approach. I don't, and as we get ready to close, I do not like, and I know you have to do your thing. I do not like that whole this is the way to do it and
Sure.
the other way sucks and that's not how you learn. And
Sure.
I don't like when people conflate teaching and learning, which are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Then they conflate teaching on a pedagogical level and an andragogical level. They're teaching kids and teaching adults two different things.
Yep.
And teaching to run a business and teaching to create champions are two different things.
Sure.
Teaching to create world-class athletes and world-class sports is way different than teaching to create a world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Sure.
Any of us who have grappled, and I think I'm still the only person, unless there's somebody else. I think I'm the only person on the planet, right, unless there's another person that competed at the Mundials, the Olympics, and ADCC. All right, and I'm telling you right now, okay, it's just I feel bad putting all those things in the same sentence. Okay, the Olympics is the level of competition at the international level of judo is such that it's just not.
I mean, I think you would also agree, though. I didn't know you did ADCC, which is like very cool. But probably those were back in the day. Like, I know you're in the Olympics 2004. When were you in ADCC?
2005.
2005. Like, that was back in the day. Like, jiu-jitsu was still not mainstream at all, and I think you would probably agree that like the level of competition since then from jiu-jitsu has really exploded, and maybe it's still not at the level of Olympic wrestling, judo, maybe, probably, I don't know. But it definitely is far, way above where it was before. Versus, I think judo and wrestling, like they've been at a much higher level for a much longer. They've got that history. They've been in the Olympics for
I think that people believe that because it's more in vogue and some of the techniques are a little bit different, that it is somehow to the point where those individuals who won back then couldn't win now. And those individuals who won then, they could win now. And when I competed, the person who was the Gordon Ryan of that particular day was Jeff Munson. Mm-hmm. And if Jeff Munson fought Gordon Ryan in his prime and Jeff Munson was in his prime, it would be a toss up to me. I wouldn't just throw the bone to Gordon Ryan, because I've put my hands on Jeff Munson before, and I've put my hands on Kosei Inoue, and I've put my hands on world class grapplers, and I know the difference and I know what it feels like.
Sure.
And Jeff Munson was also a Division I wrestler who knew how to keep a game tight in a small area and region, and pull out small wins. There's not a lot of people who've ever submitted Jeff Munson. It just hasn't happened. Doesn't matter how good they were in leg locks and all that stuff. The game has evolved, but what makes Gordon said these things. I mean, I don't have any opinion on Jeff Munson. Gordon Ryan exogenously creates a situation where he is like a world-class judo athlete or wrestler inside of the BJJ space. I mean, he's admitted these things. I'm not saying
right.
Like that's not, it's not normal.
Sure.
It's not normal. And if it's allowed, it's allowed. It's just not normal. It's just not the norm.
Sure.
I don't have any other opinion on it. I'm not. I've had people ask me, what do I think about Gordon Ryan? I say, I think he's valuable to the community. He's not the best grappler on the planet. Not by any stretch. I mean, not when Teddy Riner is alive. It's not even close. Not when I forget the name of the Cuban wrestler that won five gold medals at the Olympics in Greco-Roman wrestling. If that guy's alive, it's like he's one of the best grapplers on the planet. And I appreciate what Higan Machado said in a video recently that I watched, which is, judo is grappling, BJJ is grappling, sambo is grappling. All these things are grappling under different rule sets. And all of them are grappling. They just have different constraints.
Yeah.
And with that being said, if you do BJJ and you do Greco-Roman wrestling, there are things you're going to learn from that CLA approach that are going to apply with inside control, allowing you to control your arms, allowing you to keep your elbows next to your body and not flail your arms out, understand the loose arms, your broken arms, allow you going to dig for the underhooks. If you do judo, there's things you're going to get from the kinesthetic awareness side of where you need to be, and not having your hips, your shoulders over your hips, and like maintaining good grips and inside control. If you do all of these things, you're actually practicing a constraints-led approach, but in different sports. And with that being said, I just think that, and you heard me say it in the video, and I said it here, and I'll say it here, is that I think we get too involved in the either or approach. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a right mixture of and. I admittedly do and utilize the ecological approach. I've had somebody beat me over the head to make sure that I use it. My students love it. I don't like that they love it. Okay. They love it. Oh my God. The kids love it. Bro, they love it.
They do.
They love it. They love it. They were miserable when I did the drill. Miserable. Okay. Miserable. Okay. Listen, I gotta be honest. I gotta be honest.
Respect.
They were miserable. I felt good about it.
Sure.
But
I mean,
it
but that's another thing where we can agree. Maybe is like, if you're looking to
it's
create
fun.
top level athletes, it's like your enjoyment isn't always the highest priority,
No,
and
it's
like,
not. And nobody comes to your dojo trying to be a world champ. They come to your dojo because they want to learn jujitsu or judo, and they can learn just fine with that approach.
sure, sure,
They can.
and just to reiterate, I think again, like there is kind of a place in the overall movement sphere for drilling still when you're trying to create certain movements that look certain ways. And for me, when we're trying to create performance outcomes and function oriented things, it seems pretty clear to me from the foundational research of self organization, direct perception, ecological dynamics, etc., that we do better when we learn with tasks than when we drill the things. And so there might be certain things like we were talking about of like flying arm bars where how do you run a task for that that's safe and versus like drilling it safely is much more doable. But then I would also think about, well, maybe it's going to be more effective to just do a different task than to drill it in a way that's going to be safe, right?
I get it.
And
I'm just always when it comes to the ego approach, I'm always stuck at certain things like teaching a snatch, teaching a clean and jerk, teaching a overhead tennis serve, teaching a well done ouchigari that works where you learn how to keep the toe
yep,
on the ground and
yep,
like certain things like that. That's where I think that drilling can be helpful in those particular spaces, and to deny its utilization and to say that it's not useful, I think is a level of insincerity that none of us should purport.
sure. There's actually an interesting study here, Lindsay 2022, on Olympic weightlifting. I believe these were novices as well, but they compared the constraints-led approach to like traditional drilling for weightlifting, and they found it was like kind of equivalent. So you clearly can learn it with tasks, but again, like it's like when we start approaching these things where there's less complexity, the barbell isn't fighting back and doing different things, right?
It is.
It's like
If the trajectory is off, it is.
yeah, but like it's kind of in the same ways based on the trajectory. The physics is it's not a body. It's not an intelligent body
Not a body.
fighting you.
No.
And so in those sort of things, I think that drilling and like linear approaches seem to like, if not better, like that's where they definitely seem to be better versus a constraints-led approach. And like maybe this study that said they were like basically the same. But like that is another area where I would gravitate towards more linear approaches is with like strength and conditioning stuff. Of like, yeah, we want to do things with tasks as much as possible for skill development. But I think for strength and conditioning, it can be harder to really do those with tasks all the time and also like kind of control injury risk.
Which is why we had the functional training movement. And in the beginning of the functional training movement, it was a little circus act.
Yeah.
A little circus act
Totally.
in the beginning. No,
Totally.
it's the same thing. And people were like, I'm not doing that. F that. I'm sets and reps and I'm Olympic level weightlifting. Like me, I don't do Olympic lifts anymore. I did them in the beginning, but I was like, why am I doing that when I can grab a dumbbell and do 5 dumbbell long jumps?
Sure.
I don't have to take my time. I'm just like you. I don't have to take my time and teach how to do a snatch and teach how to do the bar and teach the bar. All I'm concerned about is triple extension. Jump on one leg if you don't want to use any weights. Take the dumbbells and jump on a box. I got triple extension and I don't have to waste my time teaching all that stuff. So I understand exactly where you're coming from. And somebody in the strength and conditioning community 15 years ago would have balked at that. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But things evolve and they change. And I can see how I've changed. There's a time when you couldn't have sold me on doing anything on the eco approach. Like anything.
Sure.
And now I use it. I I want people to know this, and we may disagree here. When it comes to if you want to be a world champion, or you want to be one of the best in the world, you have to utilize both approaches. You cannot be an either or person. It ain't gonna work. You need to use all the tools in the tool belt and put them in your arsenal for you in order to be the best.
Sure. And again, I just think, based on the evidence that we're seeing, I also kind of think, yeah, like the both approaches isn't really the way. And I think based on the evidence, the ecological approach is showing superior improvements in learning in all the populations. And there could be a question of like, could drilling have these delayed effects, right? Like you're mentioning. But as of now, I think it seems to be better.
Yeah, I don't
and
think
that's where we disagree.
No, because
And,
using the term superior approaches in learning.
but they're winning. There's the research,
They're not winning. It's new.
They're learning more.
They're not learning more either. They're learning differently. Because in the other approach, I don't want you learning more. I want you learning this.
But so this is actually a really interesting thing about the research is most of the tests they're doing, the way they're doing most of these studies, are still very narrow, right? They're not really like, for instance, if we're talking about like judo, right? Like how do you throw the guy? They're not like using constraints and then using drilling and then testing like, okay, who got more throws? It's like the performance accuracy things for tennis, right? Where they're trying to hit a target. And so that's where I'll say it seems like from the research, people using the constraints-led approach are having superior improvements in the performance metrics in these small skills, in that case, like accuracy. But again, they're training a much wider variety of things. So it seems like they're learning the specific thing better, and we would assume they're also learning the wider variety of things that the drillers and the traditional practitioners are not practicing at all. It seems like they would learn that much wider context of things much better.
Well, let me say this. For the people who are listening, I want to make sure that you all get these things as we close. There's some notable figures on the eco side. Some of you mentioned. There's Dr. Keith Davids, Dr. Duarte Araujo, Dr. Ludovic Seaford, and Dr. Rob Gray. Those are individuals who you all would really like to look up as it applies to eco and those particular approaches. There's also some research on affordances. I think that research is out of from 1979, if I believe. Now, when it comes to the drill-based approach, the drill-based approach is heavily ingrained in education. So you have people like Edward Thorndike, John Watson, B.F. Skinner, who's one of my favorite, as well as Anders Ericsson, and another lady by the name of Wilga Rivers. Those are some individuals that you all can look up if you're interested in looking up the two approaches. At this particular time, and I just want to say this for Coach V, at this particular time, per all the research, because it's still new at this particular time, there hasn't been any world or Olympic champions in that space who have utilized solely an eco approach. That doesn't mean that the approach isn't beneficial, and it doesn't mean that that it won't happen. All persons who do the drill-based approach do practice the eco approach, whether they call it eco or not. Some situational drilling, some constraints-led drilling when you got to put your hands on the belt and you can only use your legs and the other person gets to pass. Those are all things and games that you probably utilize and you don't know exactly what you're doing. Sometimes in certain situations in research, people take a phenomenon that already exists and pull it out and identify it so that it can get codified and it can be enhanced. If you want to take it all the way down to the jiu-jitsu space, when I came up, I learned half guard. As you begin to play the half guard game, you get caught in different positions of the half guard. You get caught in the Z guard and the coyote guard. And then because you get caught in those spaces, they then become a game in and of themselves of how to get out of those spaces. The eco approach would do a deep dive on saying, well, let's go to the half guard and let's assume you get stuck here. Let's play and figure it out. None of these things are incorrect. I think that sometimes we get caught on up on having arguments for the sake of arguing, when I think the best thing to do is what you did today, Coach V, was is get together, have an educational debate, give people some resources that they can look up, that they can grow as coaches and as athletes, and understand what population you're trying to serve, what goal that you want to achieve, and then pick the best approach for you, your school, or your practitioners.
This is a beautiful way to close. And I just want to again thank you for making the time to talk with me and have this open dialogue here that I certainly found really valuable. I hope you found valuable. And
Yes,
I
it was
know
absolutely
people in
fantastic.
general will really appreciate hearing these perspectives and hopefully understand both approaches better.
Yeah, man, it was good. It was nice, man. It was fun. It was fun, man. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I like spirited conversations, man, and respectful debates. I think it's good. I think we grow. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
But thank you for your time, man. I got to get to
Thank
practice.
you. Yes. Yeah. I don't want to hold you up. But
All right,
again,
man.
thank you so much.
All
It's
right, take
great
care,
talking
brother.
to you. Take care.